Why comics at all? I sometimes when I'm talking to other people, this question comes up. Why read comics? Why not books? When are you going to grow up and read books? They say. Well, let's talk about that. Hey there, this is Perch. You may have never encountered this, but many people have. And as I've talked to different pros and other things, this topic kind of swirls around. It never is talked about directly, but there's an orbit to this conversation that I think is interesting, and that's why comics? Why aren't comics for kids? Aren't they kind of the junior step where you'll do some comics, but that's really kind of the training wheels, and eventually you want to grow up and write that novel or write that TV show, work on the real stuff. Isn't comics just kind of there? Um, I've heard this before. I've heard this kind of sentiment before, and it usually comes up sometimes when people are in the shop and the kids are buying comics. The parents will say something like, "Yeah, this is a good way to get them into reading. Hope they read the comics, but eventually they eventually get to books because books is the destination point, not these the comics." And when I was a kid, I remember that was kind of the sentiment of hey, comics are that's really not reading. It's really books where you want to go. And to his immense credit, I don't praise my father enough, and my mother both. I think both of my parents were very supportive of comics. Definitely thought that those they were not cheating. They were not cheating books. In fact, my father, who was in education, my mother, who did a lot in education as well, they made sure that the libraries had comics. And I remember fights with the librarians in the schools of we don't comics are cheating somehow. They're not real books, and the kids always go for the comics, and that's we need to remove them and make them do real work with books. And my father, who had authority over the librarian, was like, nope, we're putting comics in here, and he would buy comics and put the comics in. And of course, the kids loved comics, and I think watching that's probably what shaped a lot of my views. But I hear this quite frequently. I hear people say, hey, aren't comics? Isn't comics cheating somehow? Isn't it? Isn't don't shouldn't you get to movies? And inside the industry, you see a lot of creators, particularly writers. This isn't true for artists. Artists don't go, hey, I'm doing comics now, but someday I hope to work in a giant sweatshop with 100 other people drawing you know animation cells. They don't even do that anymore, but it's mainly writers, and there definitely is this feeling of uh, let's say it's kind of like there's a pressure for comic writers to get out of comics and get to TV, and that's kind of the dream of I need I'm doing this so I can get out. And I've talked to a bunch of writers kind of in this regard to say why not do more? Why not embrace comics as kind of the amazing storytelling medium you have? I think there's just, if society is looking down on you, are you happy? Are you a great storyteller writing these stories? But even like Chris Claremont, I mean, he wrote some books, absolutely, but he will be better known for comics in his career. I think Frank Miller has done screenplays and other things, but I think he's going to be best known for comics. I think the same thing will be true of Mark Miller and several of these creators who they have crossed over and done other things, but still the comics is what they're best known for. Not just within the comics community, but generally speaking. I mean, and I think Stan Lee and the legacy he leaves behind, one of the legacies he leaves behind is the legitimacy of comics as not just a kiddie thing, but actually amazing stories can be told. But it is a perspective that needs to be embraced both kind of in comics and outside of comics. For fans and readers, they should just feel proud and confident and secure in the fact that they're reading comics. The comics are just fine, more better than fine. And for the creators, they need to feel secure that you're not slumming it. There, you don't need to feel like you're doing something less. You are doing something important. And comics, particularly if you write that great story, if you write that memorable storyline, you will be remembered. You're writing something that is a legacy. But it does require that you take it seriously. And so I think you can tell a little bit when a creator or writer comes in and they don't feel confident. There's a insecurity complex going on there around comics, and so they write something that feels throwaway. It feels like they're doing a showcase of maybe some characters, and they're really trying to, they're auditioning for their next job, not the job they have. And I'm, it's curious to me because in a world where we've got billion-dollar movie franchises, we've got some of the most powerful, well-known, recognizable IPs in the world. I mean, think about characters. Mickey Mouse is more widely known than Batman, but not by much. Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, these characters, and then the growth of Captain America and some of these others. I mean, there is worldwide recognition of Superman, of Batman, and who are the characters that are bigger than it? Like I said, Mickey Mouse. I would argue that Bugs Bunny and some of these characters are not as well known as Superman and Batman. So you're dealing with something that is huge and powerful. And so I think there's kind of it's almost a mental thing. People should hold their head up high, be proud. You're making comics. Comics matter, and you don't have to feel like it's less. But I'm curious, have any of you ever run across this in your life? Have you dealt with either parents who thought you were doing the wrong thing, or friends or teachers or anything else? I'd be curious, and not that my video here will convince anybody of anything, but if you've got a teacher or parent, listen to this. I think I can make my case a little bit better here. But comics have words and visual storytelling and panel by panel sequencing that is amazing for learning. If you're a kid, and this is proven out in schools with my own children, with me as a child, there's something to sequential art and storytelling that in many ways is more powerful in a comic than in a book. You're not just reading kind of cheap illustrations with a couple words designed to appeal to young kids. You're reading something that is got to do many things at once. It's got to tell a story, certainly. It's got to convey the emotions and the plot through words, through text. It's also got to convey that same plot and emotion through sequential art and visual storytelling and expressions on the characters. You've got a lot going on there, and it's significant. It's not a cheap, quick thing that just anybody can do. And so I think, hopefully at this point, with all the movies and all the things that have been done, it's not like people think of comics are like, oh, you mean like Richie Rich and Casper the Ghost. I don't think anybody thinks about comics in that way anymore. I mean, who knows? But there's more to comics than what meets the eye, and I think even as a society, we're still kind of learning all the different ways that comics can convey stories and convey emotions and carry plot forward, and the learning possibilities for students and for children and for people who are kind of coming up to kind of understand and visualize what it is that they're learning and what it is that they're doing are powerful in comics. And comics, by the way, don't need to pander by introducing STEM as a concept. I mean, great, they can do that in the story, but there's just a lot of value in telling a sequential art narrative within a comic. And it's not lesser. In many cases, because you have to marry up the art and the story, and when you do it well, I think it's frankly it's more powerful. I think if you were a parent, you're trying to get your kids into reading, and you could get your hands on the Fantastic Four Omnibus by John Byrne, I've recommended that many times, and I would start there. I would give them that omnibus, giant collection of his story. I think it touches on a number of different themes, both amazing, kind of fantastical, emotional, the relationship of family, the responsibility of powers. There's a lot that goes on during John Byrne's run, and Byrne was both the writer and the artist. So you get kind of, in that sense, you do get some thinking about how kind of the story can develop and how the person is juggling telling a story and doing art. If you listen to my videos in the past, you know that I'm not a fan of having one person do the art and the story all in one. I think a team is better. But the exception to the rule here is if you're trying to teach somebody about the value of sequential art and storytelling, then a comic book with the writer artist team is or same writer, same artist is a good place to start because you are seeing kind of the whole thought process for one person play out over the page. So I recommend it. And I think get your hands on that. It's a great place to start. But anyway, that's my 2 cents on it. I'd love your comments, your thoughts, your suggestions. What stories land for you? What kind of art really matters? And what do you think? Have you ever come across this? Is comics been lesser in your home or your school? Tell me your story. Love to hear it. Leave a comment below and let me know if you've got a teacher or school or parent or librarian or whoever it is that you're trying to convince. Connect me. I want to talk to them. I want to help kind of explain why comics are powerful and why they are a great teaching learning tool, just as they are. But would love to hear more. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification, tell a friend, follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thank you for listening.